It is the 31st century, and mankind is once again at war. The battlefields of the future are dominated by huge robotic war machines known as battlemechs. Piloting these awesome weapons of war are men and women, the elite of the elite, knowing that each battle could be their last. They are Mechwarriors.
Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of Dungeon Master of None. I'm Dungeon Master Matt, and today I'm here to talk with you about giant robots. Giant, big, stompy robots. They're cool. We love them in films like Pacific Rim, shows like Gundam or Voltron, or games like Battletech. I'm going to talk about two recent role-playing games for your robo-piloting needs. One that I liked very, very much, and one that wasn't so great. Too long, didn't listen to this episode. I'm reviewing Mechwarrior Destiny, which is a simplified version of the classic Mechwarrior, a Time of War role-playing game that sadly just fails to meet the standards we have for contemporary role-playing games. I didn't like it. There are some pluses, but it's no good. The other RPG I'm looking at is the Lancer RPG, a Kickstarter-funded indie game that I absolutely loved with just a few major but not deal-breaking caveats. So this bonus episode is going to be divided into two parts. First, let's take a deep dive into Mechwarrior Destiny. And now we can't talk about Mechwarrior Destiny without getting into its setting. Mechwarrior Destiny is a role-playing game for the Battletech Universe. If you're not familiar with it, a little bit about Battletech. Battletech was originally a board game published by FASA. So this was the same gaming company that was a big player back in the 80s and 90s. Their creators gave us Shadowrun and Crimson Skies, and this came from that same mind. So if you love Shadowrun or Crimson Skies, chances are you've heard of or also love Battletech. Battletech during the 90s and was really, really popular. It has spun off hundreds of novels, like, almost as many as like Star Trek or Star Wars, 5 major and several minor video games, a role-playing game, Mechwarrior / A Time of War, plus this new one, Mechwarrior Destiny, and it even had a really, really cheesy Saturday morning cartoon.
But they made one big mistake. They attacked my home planet!
Recently, Battletech is back with 2 new video games, so it's kind of, in the air right now. There's the Battletech strategy game by Harebrained Studios and Paradox Publishing, and Mechwarrior 5, a more cockpit simulation game by PGI. Catalyst Games, the company that owns the board game and RPG licenses for Shadowrun and Mechwarrior, recently had a really successful $2.5 million Kickstarter for a new box set of the Battletech strategy game. As part of that, they released a beta for the role-playing game Mechwarrior Destiny, which is now out for not just Kickstarter backers, but for everyone on Drive-Thru RPG, $15 for the PDF. Now, there's a lot of love for this board game, strategy game, Battletech, and its universe, and the simple reason for it is it rules. Let's talk about Battletech. The board game is a military, kind of hard sci-fi game about big, stompy robots and the people who pilot those big, stompy robots fighting other big, stompy robots. From the beginning, the game was meant to be more than just a board game. Each battle is kind of an exciting back and forth that lends itself to storytelling. And from the very beginning, the creators of Battletech have been building out a larger universe that, of course, lends itself to a role-playing game to play with your friends. In the board game, the pilots that you have aren't just pieces on the board, right? They're characters that you're hoping, make the kill and survive their sort of hardcore robot battle so they can gain experience and live to fight another day. And the fantasy of the Battletech universe is one that I have been in love with since I was a teen. Battletech takes place in the 31st century. Mankind is spread out among the stars, but instead of some future Star Trek utopia, constant warfare between and among 5 great noble houses. They're competing to see who will take over, the fake space Roman Empire of the future, the Star League, has led to kind of the ruin of humans in space. It's neo-feudalism. How could we imagine that in our current time? In space. Knights with giant walking tanks, these battle mechs.
Oh, beautiful piece of machinery, isn't it? 70 tons of walking, hulking, armed destruction. A battle mech, the most sophisticated fighting machine ever created. I love them.
Thanks, Jim Belushi. We love them too. Anyway, battle mechs, the name for the robots in the system, are passed down from generation to generation. The war machines themselves are ancient. They've been repaired and rebuilt time and time again. Despite there being thousands of planets in the Battletech universe and trillions of humans, it's a universe where a small group of these battle mech pilots, the Mechwarriors, can make all the difference. A small group of them can conquer or save a whole planet. It's a universe where heroes and villains, these Mechwarriors, and their very personal struggles, battles, and triumphs kind of chart the future of humanity. Speaking of the future, Battletech as a setting has a very, if you're new to it, has a very strong meta plot, right? A meta plot is, kind of the story of the fictional universe. Now, I think we've talked about here on Dungeon Master of None how in general we're not super big fans of things with strong meta plots. One of the things that we were talking about with Keith Baker that we love about Eberron is that it doesn't have a meta plot, right? There's no sort of advancement of the timeline. Everything that you want to do in your own home game can define the future. Now, Battletech in the last 30 years has basically written a 200-year and, technically more history of its universe. And it's perfect its design of this meta plot of this story is perfect to facilitate really fun and exciting battles and campaigns in the Battletech board skirmish game. But I do have to say, if you're approaching this from a role-playing perspective, I still like Battletech as a universe because the meta plot is so good and so interesting. It's been going on for 30 years and it rules. And if you don't want to be burdened by canon, you can either set your game at the end, tell a smaller story within this larger meta plot, or write your own canon, select a point in the timeline, and then have it diverge from there. So to just briefly let me geek out here and talk a bit about the meta plot of Battletech, because again, it rules. Here's the story. Humans have expanded to the stars through, really one of the few technologies that's kind of different than our world, the invention several hundred years down the line from the present of a jump drive, allowing humans to jump just 30 light years at a time between points in space. As humanity expanded out and communication kind of hadn't caught up with transportation, right? Different groups throughout human space kind of began taking over for protection, necessary alliance. And those groups evolved into, and again, it's kind of not hard to imagine given the way our own future is going, a sort of new feudalism that opposed itself with dukes and princes ruling whole planets or groups of planets. 6 great houses formed throughout the inner sphere, which is the name for the core section of space of a couple thousand planets where humans lived. And these 6 great houses allied together, stopped their warring to form the Star League. They made war on the outlying planets of humanity, the periphery, conquered them, and forcibly, in a future space colonialism brought them into the Star League. After that war, it ushered in a golden age of peace and scientific advancement for humanity, and some of humans' greatest accomplishments in military technology, bioengineering, terraforming, etc., happened during this time. But in line with this is the Dark Ages or medieval times or something in space, this age of classical innovation and prosperity did not last. The most powerful state of the Inner Sphere, the Terran hegemony, and House Cameron was brought low by a betrayal and the coup of Stefan Amaris. The rest of the Inner Sphere rallied the Star League Defense Force, the greatest army of all time, to fight the great betrayer Stefan Amaris, and there was a war that sort of decimated the very intersection of the Inner Sphere. After the war, it became clear that none of the other great noble houses had enough support to claim the title of leader or first lord of the Star League. And the army that had just kind of saved humanity realized that the rest of the universe was about to go to war among itself. And they didn't want the destructive power of their army to contribute to that. So their leader, Alexander Kerensky, and his son Nicholas took almost all of the army, the greatest army humanity had ever built, Star League Defense Force, and took it beyond the Inner Sphere into the deep periphery, never to be seen again, or would they be? What followed forms the main setting, kind of the original setting of Battletech, an idea of succession wars, as 5 great noble houses, House Steiner, House Kurita, House Davian, House Liao, and House Merrick, spent the next couple hundred years first bombing, bio, and chem weaponing each other into oblivion, literally bombing one another back into the Stone Age, or at least 20th century technology in most places, and then fighting wars of succession to see who could become the next leader of the Star League. Surprise, it was kind of stalemates and none of them won, but this setting of 5 noble houses fighting amongst each other, losing the technological prosperity of the Star League so that battle mechs could only rarely be built, and mostly they're just preserved. Things that humanity had in its past, massive space warships and stuff, are gone. So that the battle mech and the Mechwarrior are the supreme fighting force. And it's a great setting in that there's all these interesting mercenary companies that pass their mechs down from, parent to child, that have to navigate these treacherous and feuding noble houses. Each of the great space powers has a really strong theme. House Steiner and the Lyrian Commonwealth are rich and prosperous, but have incompetent leadership and generals and have a strong German flavor. House Kurita have some of the best Mechwarriors, but a sort of rigid caste system and a lot of Japanese and Arabic and Swedish influences. House Davian follow English and French influences, and they have the best organized military, but a very weak economy. House Liao shares kind of common origins in Russian and Chinese culture, and they have a strong centralized government and excellent spies, but are geographically in space the smallest of the houses. And House Merrick is a huge mix of different cultures and has the only actual claim to being a space democracy with kind of a parliament House of Lords, but it operates under a military dictatorship. And while they have a strong manufacturing base, they're often paralyzed by the infighting among the great and powerful second tier of nobles among their great noble. One of the fun things about this part of the setting in the succession wars is that humanity is searching for the lost tech of the previous age and just trying to keep every battle mech it has online. A great spot for telling interesting role-playing game stories. The meta plot continues with two of the houses, Steiner and Davian, eventually allying through marriage, perhaps heralding the end of the succession wars, as they are the most powerful force in the Inner Sphere and could actually win when suddenly the Star League Defense Force returns to the Inner Sphere. But in the several hundred years that have passed, their culture has changed to that of the clans. They're like a warrior society. The analogy here, I think, would be the nomadic pastoral cultures of Central Asia disrupting sort of Western Eurasian life as they sweep in with weapons and technology that are beyond the Inner Sphere. The Inner Sphere briefly unites to hold them to a standstill. And then the alliance between House Steiner and Davian devolves into a bloody civil war, which is also super interesting. And then a faction I haven't even talked about, Comstar, the monastic order that controls interstellar communication, launches a fanatical religious attack on almost all of humanity. It is fought back, but it ushers in a new Dark Age, and the meta plot is still ongoing. Right now, the plot is, will one of the clans that invaded the Inner Sphere take over and become the kind of supreme ruler of all the other clans, the Ill Clan? That's where the meta plot is right now. So what are the strengths of the Battletech universe? Why should you be interested in it if you're listening to this podcast? Well, it's Game of Thrones in space. There's all the noble faction infighting, plus the opportunity to play as someone oppressed by said nobility. And it has this core fantasy of that I think appeals to a lot of people who play role-playing games, of being a knight, right? Of suiting up in your armor, being nearly invulnerable except other knights, but being in space and in the future. It's a type of sci-fi game that works really well, I think, for role-playing games because, and this is just my personal opinion, I feel like with some sci-fi where you get into and I'm not saying I don't like playing these, but it's just a different approach with really advanced sci-fi where you're talking, post-human and technologies that, really appear as magic to us. It can kind of be difficult for players to understand what are the abilities and limitations of the technology we have in front of us as we attempt to tell a story or solve a problem. In Battletech, the new technologies are all very clearly delineated in what they can and cannot do. So what you get is a more grounded military science fiction, right? If you like having role-playing games where you say to your players, here's a problem you have to solve, you have to go down to a planet, defeat these people, how do you want to do it? This is a great universe to set that in. If you want an overall plot of politics and rebellions, of a mercenary company trying to earn enough cash, bills, to keep its mechs in order and keep the tradition of their mercenary company going on, this is the universe for you, right? You can tell either grand stories of political alliances and betrayals or very small personal stories, and I love it. Now, the Battletech universe has some big problems. Learning or even just familiarizing yourself with the basics of the lore can be a big ask. Maybe not as much if you have players who have played one of these Battletech or Mechwarrior video games before, which my impression is have a bigger reach than the actual board or skirmish game, at least in recent years. Just as an example, in one of the games I ran in preparation for this review, a group of battle mechs from Comstar showed up, this shadowy monastic technology order showed up, and three of the players were like, oh shit, it's Comstar, we need to get out of here. And the other, two players are like, well, okay, I forgot who they were, explain it to us. And of course, the players explained, but again, it's it has a deep lore by it. Plus, the other problem with Battletech is the lore is deeply, it's very apparent that this was written in the late 80s and 90s. Certain factions just kind of scream tropes of Orientalism or Yellow Peril. And that's not super great. There's a lot of influence of real world cultures on this space fantasy set 1,000 years in the future. And that's cool and that's fun. But the cultures that actually end up showing up, at least in the original published work, are all cultures from Western Europe, Japan, or China, and sort of forgets that there's a lot more cultures from humanity to draw on. Now, they've been trying to fix that a little bit in some of the newer published things, and as a game master, there's no reason why you can't tweak this lore to include more cultural influences from Oceania, from indigenous American societies, from Latin America, from the Caribbean, from sub-Saharan Africa, from Southeast Asia, kind of the places that get skipped over in the Battletech lore. Plus, the universe is vast. You can always put those in anywhere. But, I think that's a major drawback in the established canon. All right, now that we've talked about why, I think I had to talk about why Battletech is cool to justify reviewing this game. Because the Battletech universe is so cool, it is absolutely a great universe to do a role-playing game in. The big drawback is that the role-playing game rules that have been written for RPGs set in Battletech have been not my cup of tea. They are the rules, Mechwarrior 1st edition, 2nd edition, and 3rd edition, which is called A Time of War, are incredibly convoluted. They are hard to learn. They are incredibly detailed. Some people absolutely love that, but for me and my players, asking them to learn an incredibly complicated RPG has usually been off the table. The recent publication of Mechwarrior: Destiny, it's available for $15 on PDF on DriveThruRPG, it sold itself as a rules light or an easier to learn version of the Mechwarrior RPG. So let's get into the actual system and what it has to offer.
The distant future, the year 2000. The distant future, the year 2000.
So Mechwarrior Destiny is a substantial book. It's 250 pages, includes a ton of art. Of course, much of that is from some of the older Battletech things, and has a beautiful layout and setup. It includes rules for the role-playing game, a bunch of stats for different battle mechs or robots or vehicles, and some advice for the GM, including, I think, 2 short fiction stories. However, what it is not is a rules-light RPG. Okay, let's get down to it. The core mechanic of this game is one that I actually find incredibly annoying and I think should serve as a cautionary tale for all designers and people out there. The basic mechanic is players roll 2d6 and add some modifiers, pluses and minuses from their skills and abilities, and compare it to a difficulty pool of dice that the Dungeon Master sets. So, players roll 2d6 plus 4, and the Dungeon Master says this is a hard check, so I'm going to roll 3d6. The Dungeon Master can choose 2d6, 3d6, or 4d6. Now, already this super annoys me, is that anytime a player wants to make a check, anytime the Dungeon Master or Game Master wants to make a check, someone else also has to pick up and roll dice. This is maybe not so bad if you're all sitting around the table, but considering we're all quarantined right now, that's super annoying. It slows things down. Every single check is an opposed check. And the benefit you get from always comparing 2d6 versus plus a number to the opposition roll of 2d6, 3d6, or 4d6 is, I think, not that great in that the game has no variable gradients for most checks, right? You either pass or fail, which is something that you don't usually expect from kind of rules lighter systems, which often have kind of, you pass very well, you pass a little bit, you fail, but something good happens. There's none of that in here. I also had to do a lot of math crunching to figure out what was actually going on with these opposed checks. And, if I said to you, all right, your check is, you have a +5 on this check, you roll 2d6 +5. This is a very hard check. You're opposed with 46. I have the feeling that most players wouldn't actually know what their chances of success are, right? So the idea of always having an opposed check is it obscures the probabilities from both players and dungeon masters. I had to pull up the any dice calculator to try and figure out what those were. In case you were wondering, your chance of success is a 36% chance of success, 2d6 +5 versus 46. And that sucks. I don't think the probabilities of a check of what the dice actually are should be hidden from players. But I think that's the actual result of this system because it's hard to figure out on the fly or on your head. And I don't really see the benefit of it as well. Plus, it makes the job of the dungeon master, it's a little difficult, right? It's not super... You have a lot of responsibility, right? You have to choose, am I opposing this player's roll with a 2, 3, or 46? And it also gives you the option of adding or subtracting modifiers to the player's roll. So you already have, whenever players make a check, not only do they have to roll dice, you have to roll dice. You, as the dungeon master, have to do this sort of mental task of choosing a difficulty. Okay, that's fine. But then also adding modifiers and subtracting modifiers as well. And if you're like, well, I already do that. Again, this is supposed to be a more rules light system. The same system is used for mech combat or personal combat whenever you attack someone or whenever someone attacks you. You roll 2d6, they roll 2d6. You end up with kind of a swingy system overall for basically all checks. But again, it doesn't really matter that it feels so swingy because it comes down to a binary choice, right? If you roll 2 6s, you're probably going to win. But if the thing opposing you, rolls 2 1s, you're always going to win no matter what you roll or what you have. But again, that swingy doesn't matter because it all comes down to a binary position. However, I can see why they put this always opposed rule into the game is because this game has a ton of pools for the players to have. Players have edge, which allows them to re-roll their dice or re-roll the dungeon master's dice, which is a limited pool that each player has a certain number of re-rolls per game session. Players also have a pool of plot points. These are kind of like a amalgamation of hero points that might let you take an extra small action or move during your turn, or something like fate chips, which might let you add some detail or thing to the scene. Plot points, unlike edge, are not a limited resource in that they're an exchange between players and dungeon masters. Players spend plot points, the dungeon master gets plot points. The dungeon master spends plot points, that means a player gets an extra plot point. There's also even more for players to keep track of in this game. Players during mech combat or vehicle combat have to keep track of heat tokens, a classic idea in Battletech. And they also have to track both player and mech damage. Whenever you take damage after certain thresholds, kind of like a Shadowrun, this degrades your ability to do good things. Now, if you're saying, already this is sounding really complicated, but wait, there's more. Players have traits, which can give them minor +1 bonuses to attacks. Damage can give -1, -2, -3 bonuses to attacks. Speed, terrain, other modifiers add other small bonuses. The game has several attributes, a list of 32 skills, 3 of which, piloting, gunnery, and knowledge, are in fact a subset of even more skills. So in a typical game, there are 40 different skills for your players to choose from. And if you're looking at this being like, this is incredibly complicated, you are right. I will tell you, as someone who has played and read all of the older RPGs for the Battletech universe, it's still less complicated than those. But I feel like for most players, the amount of fiddliness for a rules-light game is going to be overwhelming. Despite all that, having the classic kind of attributes and skills that give bonuses to checks, traits, which are kind of like feats, which give minor bonuses to certain checks, and all of these conditional modifiers, this game also has a lot of stuff borrowed from more narrative-based games, right? More collaborative narrative games like Powered by the Apocalypse or Fate. However, I feel like this game is written by someone who had a friend excitedly explain how fun games like Fate or Powered by the Apocalypse can be, and then try and write rules on them that follow those same ideas without actually playing those games. Players have tags, which are, to quote the game system, if you're having a difficult time, feel free to use the catchphrases taken from favorite comic books, movies, TV shows, or novels, just tweak slightly to make them unique to your character. For example, you can have the tag, "That was totally wicked." Could be tweaked to, "That was totally killin'." I feel like this game, and there's another example of this, which talks about the necessary spirit of cooperation, it's not bad to have, was written trying to convince players who don't like more collaborative mechanics that they should use them, but it also doesn't trust the creativity of game masters and players to come up with interesting tags and ideas, right? A tag, "That was totally killin'," I don't know, that seems like kid shit to me. I don't know. The game constantly uses the word narration for player actions on their term, but I feel like they're confusing what it actually means to play an RPG and just calling all of that narration. At the core of all of this add-on of collaborative storytelling stuff to the Mechwarrior Destiny system is something called the Q system, which was originally written by Catalyst Games a couple of years ago for their Valiant Comics RPG. And again, it suffers the problem of trying to take the best of a more detailed-oriented game and the best of a more collaborative narration game, simulationist plus collaborationist, and combining them to get the best of both worlds, and it ends up with the worst of both worlds. A weak narration system that doesn't really empower players to make interesting choices or encourage them to build interesting, nuanced characters, and a simulation system that is still difficult to understand, still has lots of charts and fiddly bits that have to constantly be referenced or referred to. So instead of the best of both worlds, you end up with the worst of both worlds. One thing that Mechwarrior Destiny does have, it does have some options for integration with the various Battletech tabletop skirmish games. Because, and that's a positive, because the rules for playing out mech fights in this, I think, are very unsatisfying. They're not freeform enough to be like, oh, hey, your players, through force of plot points and will, can take on a force 10 times their size. No, if your players are in small battle mechs and go up against a lance of atlases, they're going to get their butts kicked and lose their battle mechs. So it's very much, this is still a war skirmish game. I think a lot of people might actually want a role-playing game that they can use as an envelope to wrap around the, again, still very fun Battletech skirmish game. The downside of Battletech skirmish games is they take much longer than I think you would want any fight in a role-playing game to last. But I think if you're looking to do that, my advice to you as a dungeon master would be find a different role-playing game and then wrap that around the Battletech Total Warfare or Alpha Strike rules. Again, here's the rub. This is a tactical, fairly detailed RPG, at least as contemporary games go, much less detailed compared to the original Mechwarrior, but it has some elements of narration games like Fate thrown on top. But actually it does both of these really badly. While it is less complex than A Time of War, so I guess it kind of succeeds on its mission or its selling point. The problem is it is still more complex than the vast majority of contemporary RPGs that most of, at least in my experience, my players have encountered. So that's my review of Mechwarrior Destiny. I would be remiss to fail to point out that some of the art, old and new, is really great. The book has a ton of pre-generated characters, which we love. 6 sample mission kind of possibilities or trees. The layout is great. It does kind of the unusual step of telling you the game first and then doing character creation, which I think I rather like. Overall, it's got some interesting ideas. However, I can't really even... I was hoping when I picked this up, my recommendation would be, all right, it's got some flaws, but if you're a Battletech fan like me, go for it. I think it's got some flaws, and even if you're a Battletech fan like me, I can't really recommend it. All right, that's Mechwarrior Destiny. On to something more positive. I'm going to take a look at Lancer, the role-playing game. Let's talk about Lancer, the role-playing game by Miguel Lopez and Tom Parkinson Morgan, edited by Melody Watson. This role-playing game is one of the more successful independent Kickstarter RPGs in the past couple years. I think 1 year ago, raising $500,000 on Kickstarter, and I have to say, it's well-deserved. I think Tom Parkinson's art, he is the author of very successful, and from what some of my friends tell me, very good webcomic, Kill 6 Billion Demons, great name. And he has also had his hand in designing role-playing games before. He, I think, wrote, with, I think, some help, an RPG for the setting created for his webcomics, Kill 6 Billion Demons, called the Broken Worlds RPG, which I believe is available to anyone who wants to sponsor him on Patreon. His art is incredibly evocative. It has a great style that you will instantly recognize. And the Lancer role-playing game is no different. You're going to look at the cover. You're going to look at some of the art inside of some of these great mechs and sci-fi designs. There's also some great art by many other artisans, specifically calling out one of my favorite artists on the internet, Connor Fawcett's work in here. I just have to say this role-playing game is worth it for the art alone. And speaking of worth it, in a move that I think anyone who has reached this level of success should copy, a free version of this role-playing game, which is missing only some of the art and some of the setting information and NPCs, but has all of the core game, is available for free on their website, link in the show notes below. And the free version just for the PDF, or sorry, the not free version just for the PDF of the game rules with all of that extra stuff is only $25. So again, this is, I think, some of the best art you're going to find in an indie RPG. If you love mechs, the style is, despite lots of great artists working on this, incredibly unified and gives a wonderful theme. Like, all the characters here have this gritty, they said the style is mud and lasers feel of a far future robot pilots, and you get the feel of that as there's, these robots that, have things hanging from them, pilots sitting on their shoulders, smoking a cigarette, or even like cooking a meal on like the mech generator, and you're like, oh, this feels like a universe that I could capture at my table. And again, there's like one exception, there's like one piece of art of characters that look like generic anime characters that don't seem to fit with anything else on page 398, 399, but the rest of it, beautiful art direction in this book. A couple other things to note before I dive in is that this book also comes with a free online app called CompCon, which helps players build their characters and mechs, gives them, a fancy online character sheet builder that is super great. Since the release of this game, the authors have also come out with a setting book for one specific part of the role-playing game universe they've created, the Long Rim. So I think overall, the authors of Lancer have put that $500,000 from Kickstarter to good work, creating a really interesting role-playing game system full of great art. And before we get into it, there is I really have one major caveat with the book before we get into it. I was wondering if it was just me. I looked around online, and it's not. The layout, font, and kerning in this game is terrible. If the game wasn't any good, it would almost ruin it. And it was approaching so bad that despite me loving almost everything else about this game, it almost made it unplayable or unusable. I don't know about the print copy. I don't have a print copy, but on the PDF copy that I bought, reading it, like the way the letters look is so bad, it just, honestly, it hurts me. It makes, I saw someone else post online, is this what it looks like, feels like to have like bad eyesight or some other impairment to your ability to read, because that's what it feels like to read this book. The layout, like overall, like, black text on a white background. It's got like some fun, easy to read sidebars. Some of the rules and character abilities are formatted in a way that looks nice, but somehow the way the letters look on the page, there's like these weird skinny and thick parts, and the spacing between the letters is all wrong. It just hurts to read. It almost ruins the game. However, now that that's aside, let me give you a quick overview of Lancer, because I absolutely love it. When you get the Lancer RPG, whether the free or $25 version, you actually get 2 role-playing games kind of in one. 2 systems, 2 great tastes that work well together. You got your lime and my coconut. And while you might initially be like, well, there's kind of 2 basic systems to a game, I don't like that. I kind of like unified rules. Whoa, hold on. It actually works really well. One of the problems if you do a role-playing game that is about Soviet women pilots during World War II, starship fighters, or Mechwarriors in Battletech, is you have 2 kind of very different areas of play, right? You're either inside your war machine or you're outside of it. I think the most successful role-playing game systems for those types of things are ones that assume, 1, every player character is a starship pilot, is one of the Nacht Hexen, is a robot jockey in this universe called Lancers. They drive these armored cavalry robots. You've got to assume everyone's one of these, because when you go from, regular play to, okay, everyone load in, jump, strap in, mount up, if you will, everyone's got to have something to do in that robot fighting section, and the best way is to just have everyone be a pilot of those things. And this game, like the other great indie RPG, Nacht Hexen, has embraced that idea. There's one general set of rules for playing the game outside of your robots, and one general set of rules for playing it inside. Now, they share some core mechanics and similarities, but they're basically 2 different systems. So there are 2 role-playing game systems in one. The first is called narrative play, and the second is mech combat. In narrative play, your characters can have interesting equipment and abilities, but it breaks down to each character has a background that relates to who they were before this adventure began, and a set of triggers, some things that they're extra good at. The core mechanic in narrative play is whenever players attempt to accomplish something risky, the game master has the option to call for a check. If the players on a D20 die roll a 10 or higher, they succeed. If it's lower, they fail. The game master can also set a a check as, and I love this, as risky, where that unless the players succeed with a critical success, a roll of 20 or a result of 20 or higher, that they suffer some consequence for even if they succeed. So yes, they get the information they want. However, the spy organization on the planet they're on notices that they're there. Or it could be something more simple than that. It could be it just takes some extra time or something like that. Backgrounds and assistance from other player, advantageous situations can give players extra D6s to their roll. If it's something the player is particularly good at, the trigger system, kind of like skills. Things like investigate, invent or create, patch, charm, act unseen or unheard. Players can get flat bonuses to the check of starting at first level or level 0 where the game begins, a +2, but these can go up to a +6. So you kind of have this free-form check system where if players are doing something that has a chance of failure, you can call for a check. You can make the check risky. There's also a great set of rules for calling for redos on a check, right? That can kind of up the ante. Okay, sure, you can try this thing, you failed again, but now the consequences are this. I love this in that it is freeform and rules light, and it's going to set up an interesting mission adventure that is going to make the second part of the game, the mech combat, meaningful and fun, while still giving kind of everyone something to do in both spheres of play. The second part of the game, the second rule system, is mech combat, and it uses the same kind of basic idea. You roll a d20, usually you're trying to hit a 10 or a number near 10 or higher to succeed. If you hit a number 20 or higher, you critically succeed. Mech combat, however, is much more gritty and tactical. Players have special traits that give them super abilities, things like ace pilot, leadership, brawler, that make them good at certain areas of the game. Mech combat, unlike narrative play, is highly structured. Familiar to people who have played Pathfinder or the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons, players have an action economy based on they can move, plus they can take a full action or 2 quick actions that have detailed sets of things they can do, while giving the game master enough room that if they want to do something that's not described by the rules, there are enough guidelines there for you to call for an appropriate check. One of the interesting ideas of the mech combat mechanic is that players have a number of kind of systems they have to keep track of. They have hit points and structure damage, they have heat and stress damage, and fighting in combat is a lot about managing these. A lot of players' special abilities and the ability to kind of help each other out by boosting another player or getting a target lock on an enemy mech, diving for cover, can add these extra D6s. I suppose I should quickly talk about them. The core mechanic beyond just rolling a D20, high you succeed, low you fail, is the accuracy and difficulty system. Lots of abilities in parts of the game, from backgrounds to many talents to things like getting a target lock on an enemy or putting your mech into cover or bracing against incoming fire, can add or subtract these extra D6s. Accuracy are positive D6s. They add to your roll. Difficulty are negative D6s. They subtract from the roll. The core idea here is that accuracy and difficulty in equal amounts cancel each other out. So if a player has 4 accuracy on a check and 2 difficulty, they actually only have 2 accuracy on a check. You roll the extra accuracy dice and take the best one. So you have a potential, no matter how many accuracy you have, of a +1 to a +6 on your check. Players' actual mech ability also have some mech abilities, things like agility, engineering, or hull, that actually improve their mech based on how good of a pilot they are. The mech combat, after trying it out, overall, I have to say, I love it. If you like a tactical role-playing game where players have to work together, it kind of borders on that wargaming idea, it works really well. Players had to coordinate their lock-ons, help each other out with their talents, take cover, brace against fire, try and get some flanking on enemies. It worked out really well. I had a lot of fun with it. After the players learned the system, they had a lot of fun mastering this interesting combat system too. The game of mech combat also has a lot of customization and fiddly bits. This is a game where you have to, I think, at least from my experience, start players off at level 0. They start with kind of a basic mech that can specialize a little bit, and then as they level up, they can pick all sorts of different mechs that, can do really crazy things, manipulate gravity, do some techno sorcery, create non-human personas or persons or AIs, mechs that are defensive, mechs that are melee oriented, artillery mechs, right? This is super fun if you have players who love detailed character development and getting new abilities and equipment. However, it is not simple. Building mechs takes time and is not something that I would really even suggest doing during a session of play. It's definitely something for, all right, here's the app that you need to build a mech. You got to do this. You can purchase a new higher level mech before our next game, but you better build that mech before we begin. It creates a lot of interesting and tactical choices, which is something that I think listeners will know that I, as a dungeon master, is absolutely my cup of tea. However, one downside to this is until you've played the game, right, it's really hard to tell whether things are good or not. Even having done 2 sessions of play as a dungeon master, I'm still not sure whether some of the advanced systems are like interesting, useless, super useful, overpowered. So the sheer volume of choices and customization and different amount of special technology, e-attack, electronic defense systems, melee weapons, things that manipulate the battlefield, it's hard to tell if they are good or not. I think if you have players that might be overwhelmed by choice and variety, this is a system. However, the core mechanics of mech combat are incredibly satisfying. One that I absolutely love and will be looking for ways to add into my own RPGs is there's a really simple system of overheating for extra actions. You can add heat to your mech, which could eventually lead to your mech taking damage or shutting down or taking a penalty to get extra actions. And actually, when I was reading this, I decided this describes one of the core ideas of Battletech, which is balancing a mech's heat and stress with the ability to do what you want and accomplish what you need to quickly for Battletech better than really any of the Battletech RPGs. So I actually spent a lot of time after we had played our first session of Lancer building my own Lancer rule set for Mechwarrior. So what I did is I combined the 2 RPGs that we were playing today. That's neither here nor there. Last part of overview of Lancer the RPG, there are some robust rules for creating missions, creating NPCs, a ton of sample NPCs, and a bunch of pages about the setting for the game, which takes place in the far, 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 far future. Humans, without encountering any other sentient aliens, have spread throughout a corner of the galaxy and have all sorts of diverse societies. There is one central striving towards utopia, maybe not all bad, society called the Union. There are megacorps. There's a kind of interesting background idea of, one AI that has achieved sentience. There's a lot of struggle and conflict here. However, I will say a lot of this setting is pretty high concept and might be difficult for new players to really take in. It is 70 pages of information, and one of the downsides is, at least in the core book, at least I didn't see, it kind of lacks like a good 1 and 5 page thing you can hand to players that makes it easy to understand this. While I love the art and I love a lot of the mechanics of the game, I didn't fall in love with the setting. And I think other people will. There are things I absolutely love about the setting. It, I think, is an attempt by the author to investigate and interrogate, I think is the word I'm looking for, ideas of colonialism and inequality in a far future sci-fi setting. the complexity of it and the conflicts it set up didn't quite catch me as something that I wanted to devote a long-running campaign to exploring. Now, maybe if I bought the more detailed section of the setting book, it would. Last but not least, I should mention this is, if you buy the paid version, is a fairly robust and long book. It is over 400 pages. It is a massive tome, right? The rules, however, I think come in at under 100 pages. Not too much. The rest of the book is full of options for battle mechs, information about the setting, fun NPC stats, and actual background descriptions of the NPCs. And, of course, a toolkit for creating kind of a Lancer adventure and running, some tables that you can put together for a game. How to structure and balance narrative play versus mech combat. Ideas for what to do after character death, ways your characters can come back as clones and stuff like that. Ideas for fun missions, right? I think this is a game that can be played without a hex or square battle map, but with some of the fun ideas of cover and adjacency, I think it works best, at least it did with our players, on a hex map with fun terrain features and stuff like that. It gives you a lot of fun tables. However, one thing that is absolutely lacking, and I think, again, like I said, I love this game. I have some major but non-deal-breaking caveats. One of them is the kind of text and the way the text looks on the PDF and its unreadability. My second major one is that this is a 400-page published indie RPG that doesn't have a couple starter adventures. There's no reason not, if you're devoting a book this long, to have, I would expect in a 400-page book to have a set of pre-generated characters and more than one with a book this long pre-generated adventure. Now, I know lots of dungeon masters and game masters never want a pre-generated set of characters or adventures, but I feel like if you're an indie RPG, and even if you're not, if the book is this long, give us a set of 6 pre-generated characters that we can print off and hand to our friends, and a pre-generated first adventure that is interesting and fun, showcases the great writers that have put together this RPG, so that if you want to try out this game with the least amount of investment, you can. And that's, I think, a missed opportunity. And again, one that is, I think, an easily fixable mistake, right? If you're making a 431-page book, you can devote 5 pages to pre-generated characters and 10 pages to a pre-made adventure. Not saying that Dungeon Master advice and the pre-made tables are bad. They're not. But they're no substitute for, that kind of first starting adventure. I think back to some of my favorite game systems that have that first adventure that can help, even if you're not going to use it, nothing can help a game master understand the tone and feel and possibilities to run a game like something pre-written like that. You can look at this and be like, oh, okay, I can see how this will work and play. And even if you're not going to use it, right, you can use that to help inspire you as you write your own adventures. So, Lancer RPG, it threads the fine line between like a rules light narrative game and fun, crunchy, if you have players that love tactical combat and cool combos and having a very unique character and set of equipment and battle mech, absolutely knocks it out of the park. I think this is a great standard for games that want to mix those two genres. It did everything that Mechwarrior Destiny didn't do and did it well. By separating out mech combat with a rules light system for outside of mech combat, you've sort of cut this Gordian knot in two. It has a distinct feel that I think it is not Battletech with its big, stompy, slower robots, but at the same time, it has its own identity that is not exactly Neon Genesis Evangelion or Gundam, right? There's a very lived-in feel to the world, fun ideas about, 3D printing your battle mech after it gets destroyed. Definitely, the description, Mud and Lasers, captures the art and the play of this game. The tactical system forced my players in my playtest to make tons of interesting choices about positioning and weapon systems they wanted to use and teamwork, and they were absolutely loving the mech-to-mech combat, and the rules light system worked well enough for the stuff outside it. So that's Lancer in, and I think I can say without reservation, I've laid out the couple flaws that are not insignificant, but are not deal-breaking. I highly recommend the Lancer RPG. The core rules are absolutely free, so there's no reason for not checking it out if big stompy robots are something that interests you. All right, gotta take a quick break and be right back with some conclusions. Okay, to wrap up our Robo Spectacular bonus episode, 2 role-playing games, one that I don't think deserves your money, also the game company Catalyst probably also doesn't deserve your money, and another that, for the free option, no reason you shouldn't check it out, Lancer RPG, and the $25 option is super great. For me, looking back at playing and reviewing these 2 role-playing games, I actually, and just finished a couple nights ago running one, combined some of the ideas of the rules. I think the actual Lancer RPG rules are flexible enough that if you want to put in the time and effort in homebrewing, it's super easy to make your own mech designs. So if you wanted to do a more, for me, a Battletech setting, make some rules adjustments so that you could run kind of bigger, stompier robots, you can do that. If you wanted to do a more anime, Evangelion, Gundam, Macross style stuff, you could also do that, right? The rules are flexible enough that you can edit them. The only problem is it then becomes harder to use some of the available assets like CompCon for homebrewing. But reporting back after my custom hybrid Lancer RPG set in the Battletech Universe, the rules so far were super successful. So if you're looking for something to play Battletech as I originally was, Lancer RPG, some of the ideas in it need a little tweaking, but it works for more than just its setting, which for me I think is a great mark of an excellent role-playing game system. These are, of course, not the only role-playing games that can be used or are designed for giant, big, stompy robots. They're just some of the more recent ones to come out. If you, a listener, have ideas for other role-playing game systems that you've had success with big robots, suggestions for me to review or take a look at, or ideas or your own thoughts on Mechwarrior Destiny or the Lancer RPG, or, if you like, let's say, the Broken Worlds RPG, let me know. Send Rob and I an email at dmofnone@gmail.com, or you can give us a call at the Dungeon Master Hotline, 774-203-4629. Hey, thank you everyone for listening, and thanks for all your support of the show. Really appreciate it. Until our next regular episode, discard the meat, save the metal, and no guts, no galaxy.